Hey freaks, it's JJ. Welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about Between the Buried and Me, and we are talking about their 2015 album, Coma Ecliptic, and the concept that goes behind it. I'm doing this video because it was requested recently, but actually Between the Buried and Me videos have been requested quite a bit in the past few years that I've had this channel. The only thing that was holding me back was I wasn't initially a huge fan of the vocals. But after listening to this album a couple times, I've definitely warmed up to it. And so now I can say that I like this album and I can now talk about it. So, a new fan of Between the Buried and Me. Anyway, let's jump into the story. Okay, so, this whole story actually reminds me a lot of the Mars Volta's, The Loused in the Comatorium. It follows kind of like a similar storyline, but basically, in track 1, Node, we meet the protagonist, and he kind of wakes up in the wake of some sort of apocalyptic event that's happened in his world, one in which our protagonist believes that he's definitely going to die if he remains on this Earth or this planet any longer. So, because he can't face the reality of his world, he decides to seek escape into another life on, another world. Really, the song is just kind of about there being no hope for the protagonist, which is, what's going to force him to go on this desperate journey. We then get to track 2, the Coma Machine. So, the protagonist enters this coma-like state where he begins his journey through time and space, and his goal is to travel through various past lives that he's lived in order to find one that is worth living out the rest of his days in. And so that's kind of the main premise of the concept behind this album is this protagonist searching through different past lives on different worlds that he's lived. So he knows that there's a pretty decent chance that he could die during this procedure going into this coma machine type thing, but he's extremely desperate to get out of his reality, and he believes, I think, that if he stays in his world any longer, he's just gonna die. And so that's what inspires him to go on this journey in the first place. But we, as listeners or as readers of the lyrics, I think we get the sense that this protagonist is definitely going to learn something on this journey while in the coma machine, something that he's not quite expecting. Track 3, Dim Ignition. So it is here that the protagonist enters the first world, and the first world he arrives in is this really old planet ruled by a single god. It's this ancient sorcerer who ends up granting our protagonist ultimate power over this planet. Basically, he makes him a god of this planet. And so our protagonist can now pretty much do and make anything. The only caveat is that he must remain utterly alone. He can't create, other people, to rule over him. He has to be totally alone. And so the world is, empty and bare of any life outside himself. And it's completely desolate, and he'll be totally alone for eternity. So a little time passes, and our protagonist can no longer stand being alone. He decides to retreat from this world, not wanting to live life on an empty planet forever. Track 4, Famine Wolf. So here our protagonist wakes up into another life where he's this kind of beast-human hybrid type creature who, must feed on human flesh. And so in this world, it's been overrun by these animal creature human things where the real humans have been reduced to the food source for these creatures. And so our protagonist is now this famine wolf, and he battles with his humanity versus his hunger and his need to survive. So he's kind of conflicted and goes through periods where he feels immense guilt over what he's doing to survive. But then the beast takes over, and he all he can feel is his hunger. So eventually our protagonist gets to the point where he's yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't take any more of this. And so he decides to leave this world. We now get to track number 5, King Redeem, Queen Serene. This is actually my favorite track on the album. Here our protagonist enters a world where humans have been kind of transformed into these weird, deformed corruption entities that have no power, no freedom, no voice. And I kind of imagine them as a bunch of little embryo type fetus things floating along in this womb. But basically, they're enslaved to this miserable existence, kind of just tumbling around in a sea of confusion, not really knowing what's going on. And the reason for this enslavement is because of this like weird ability that like this deformed human race has, which is these humanoid things have evolved with a mutation that allows them to see a spectrum of light that others cannot see. The kind of fear of this like ability to see things that others cannot, I think, is what led the monarchy of this world to keep the humans oppressed, just out of fear that, you know, like this special ability, this special sight would lead to a truth that would threaten the domination of the monarchy. Track 6, Turn on the Darkness. So here our protagonist enters another world. Obviously the last one was not too great. Just confused and floating around in like nothing. So he goes to the next world, and in this next world it's another apocalyptic planet. So like the world has ended in some kind of fiery blaze, or like maybe the sun has burned out and like scorched the earth as it died. Ash falls from the sky, and like I imagine it being a lot like the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy. If you haven't read that, they also did a movie called The Road, which was actually really well done and very comparable to the book. But that's kind of how I imagine this like ashy like apocalyptic world. So yeah, it's a time and place where like humans have like caused the destruction of their planet, perhaps due to like their ignorance or carelessness on their part. And so a race of vagrant humans just kind of walk the endless planet, just, you know, this desolate land, just wandering aimlessly. And, you know, the survival of the human race seems pretty hopeless. So our protagonist ends up playing the part of this like prophet type character, where he comes to deliver hope to these people and tells them that, you know, they'll survive. Humanity will survive if they just listen to him and his teachings. But the people don't believe him, and they carry on walking around aimlessly through the, you know, burned ashen world, heading towards basically their eventual demise. So the protagonist decides, yeah, this isn't the planet for me. Another apocalypse, a planet. So that takes us to the next track, track 7, Ectopic Stroll. So ectopic is a medical term that basically means that something is not in its correct place, much like our protagonist during this story. So our protagonist wakes up in the Coma machine, you know, in a panic. He's pretty terrified by the fact that, you know, he can't find a world that's worth living in. He can't find a past life that's suitable to stay in because they're all apocalypse planets, you know, like he's like gone through all these worlds and they're all the apocalypse, and he's like, what the hell? Why can't I just find a normal planet to like live peacefully? So he begs the doctor, you know, possibly the man whoever is in charge of like operating the Coma machine, he begs for help. So that takes us right into track number 8, Rapid Calm. And so here our protagonist is given something by the doctor, perhaps like some kind of sedative with maybe like some hallucinogenic side effects. And our protagonist sees these kind of like ghost-like beings that are made of smoke, and they kind of just like beckon him onward to, you know, continue making his way through the Coma machine and through his past lives. But our protagonist is, you know, starting to have some doubt here. He's like, yeah, I don't know if I should trust these visions of my subconscious. So our protagonist is kind of now faced with a choice, you know, like to follow these weird beings back into the Coma machine to continue a journey that, you know, might risk his life, or to give up and remain in the real world and get out of the Coma machine. So upon doing the research for this video, I found that some people thought that this is where he decides to like leave the Coma machine, but in my interpretation of the lyrics and with my storytelling need for things to make sense, I think that he chooses to continue his search for another world. So he continues on his journey in the Coma machine. We then get to track number 9, Memory Palace. So our protagonist enters a world far more technically advanced than we can ever imagine. Humans have become one with machines, and they have more freedom and knowledge than ever before. They believe, you know, they've become near immortal, like as their consciousness dwells in this like cyber network. But they sometimes forget that they're still partially human. And, you know, they're still attached to these mortal shells that will eventually die. So, you know, after spending so long in this, like, cyberspace reality, it feels like to them, whenever they have to go tend to their mortal bodies, it feels like they're dying. Because, you know, the physical world is nothing like this other cyber network world that isn't quite real. So I think this is a really great metaphor, basically for the protagonist really not wanting to exit the coma machine and deal with the real world, even though, that we kind of get the sense that that's what he should do. That's what this album is telling him to do and what he needs to learn. But he's still in refusal. So we finally get to a planet, in this track, a planet that's not an apocalyptic planet, but it's still a dystopia. So basically, this still isn't the place for him, and so he decides to leave. Track 10, Option Oblivion. So here we have the protagonist is again faced with basically the same choice as last time. Either to continue on in the coma machine and keep searching for, the right world, / the right life to go to and return to, or to exit the coma machine and deal with reality. But there's a caveat here, is that this is his final journey. So whatever world the coma machine brings him to next will inevitably be the one that he's forced to live in forever. So our protagonist considers this carefully, weighs the odds, and then decides to pull the lever that will bring him back into the coma machine. And he just kind of rolls the dice and decides to anything is better than the world he's living in currently. So he decides to go back and take his chances with the final world. Track 11, Life in Velvet. So here we have our protagonist waking up on the last stop on this coma machine. The world he's going to have to live the rest of his days in. And so he wakes up and he finds it's his reality, like the one he's been running from this whole time. And so he realizes that, the coma machine was really just a trick. There was never really a way out. And, we as listeners or, readers of the lyrics kind of understand that the machine's purpose was to teach the protagonist a lesson. And the lesson being, like, you can't just run from your problems. You have to wake up and face reality. And we come to understand that, like, all the worlds that the protagonist visited were really vastly worse than whatever world he was originally from. And the machine is kind of trying to show him that, he could have things so much worse. And that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. So that's the kind of lesson to be learned here. But then we get to, the end of this track is the final track on the album. And, does the protagonist learn the lesson of this story? And I don't think so. I think this album has more of a tragic ending, where our protagonist does not learn this lesson, and he cannot face the reality of his world, and he just dies in the end. So, yeah, sorry for a sad ending, but that's kind of a theme here with a lot of these concept albums don't have happy endings. And I think that's for a reason. I think it makes it a little bit more poignant in the end. So that wraps up the story behind Coma Ecliptic by Between the Buried and Me. I do plan on doing some more of their albums, covering some more of their albums in the future. Drop down in the comments and let me know what you think of my interpretation of this album. As always, this is not like any kind of like official version of the story. This is just my personal interpretation of the lyrics, but I always am interested to know what your guys' interpretation is, so please feel free to drop that down in the comments. Anyway, I have a huge announcement that I'm really excited to talk about. So next week, make sure you guys are subscribed to my Metalhead newsletter. If you're not a part of my Metalhead community, then just sign up at the link down in the description. And next week I'm sending out a newsletter with like an announcement of a big project that I've been working on, like on the down low. So it's been a secret project that I've kind of not said anything about for a little while. So I don't want to give too much away right now because I want you to be surprised. So, but I'm really excited to talk about it. So make sure you're signed up. Also, for any of you comic book nerds out there, I know there's a few of you, I just wrapped up a really awesome interview as a part of Comic Crusaders. If you guys want to go check that out, I'll put a link in the description or at the end of this video. But basically, I need to give a shout out to Phil for being so awesome and getting me all these amazing books. Yes, this is what you think it is. It's an occult coloring book, which of course goes along with the Dario Bava, Orgy of the Blood Freaks, and of course Murder Vibes with the Monster Dimension. Really awesome comics if you guys want to check those out. Highly suggest, and the creator's a really cool dude. Anyway, that kind of wraps up my whole spiel for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time.